Hey, and welcome back to Power of the Programmer. This is section 3.2, and in this section we're going to be covering variables. So to get started, it would be good to know what a variable is. So the formal definition of a variable is an object that is used to store information to be referenced and manipulated in a computer program. So this is not a very good description in my opinion because it is hard to understand without formally being introduced to programming. Another way that I like to explain it, and I feel like makes a lot more sense, is in a lot of ways is more of a label. Just like how you label words like wallet, you can label types of stuff like apples, you can label inches. In a lot of ways, a variable is a label. The only difference is these labels can be used for any object in a computer program. So in this case, let's go ahead and open up Sublime Text. I already have it open, and go to the folder provided in this chapter and open the VARIABLES.PY file. So in this file, I pre-prepared a couple of variables and a little bit of an example of what are variables. So let's get started and let me explain this code. So in the top, I had an import statement. You can ignore that for now. That's not too important. So the next line is this is a variable equals to 7. So in this example, I'm labeling 7 as this is a variable. So now this computer is holding the number 7 under the tag this is a variable, kind of like a name tag, like a label. So if we go ahead and run this program, when I say print this is a variable, and I'm just opening up the folder on my terminal. This is under section 2, variables, Python, variables.py. Ooh, that is not the right file. 7. There we go. So as you can see, I stored the number 7 in the tag this is a variable. So now variables can be more than just numbers. Variables can also be words or strings in programming. A string is a series of characters. So for example, H is a character, E is a character, L is a character, and a string is a bunch of those grouped together. So let's run this example again and remove the remainder because we are not there yet. So this is also a variable. Let's run Python variables2.py. So you can see here it printed 7 because 7 is still being held, and then it also prints this is also a variable and prints that hello, as you can see over here. So over here you can see that variables you can initialize as many variables as your computer can hold, and let's add this all as different strings to demonstrate. But the case that if you reuse a label, then you can only have one label of everything. So the moment you reuse it, you are overwriting it. So for example, let's change this to hi, how are you, question mark. So what do you think this is going to print out? If your understanding is correct, then this should print out question mark, how are you? If you don't believe me, let's run this program and find out for ourselves. So if you think it's question mark, how are you, then you are correct and you can see the program run it. If you think it's hello, how are you, question mark, then after we run it, I'm going to explain why that is not true. So let's run this again. As you can see, if we take out the previous variables, I'm just commenting it out, it's actually question mark, how are you? It's because just like a a number, a phone number, a social security number. These variables are uniquely identified. It's the unique address or name tag for everything on your computer or on your program. So the moment you use a variable again, it will be overridden. So let's move on to the next example and show you another thing that variables can be. In this case, I'm using an array, which is similar to a string, hello, where each one is a character strung together. This is another way of storing series of numbers, and we're going to be covering this a lot more in the next section. In this case, I'm holding a series of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's go ahead and print it with variables.3.py. If you're following along, these files are all under variables with different numbers at the end. So you can see this prints out an array. So as you can see, variables can really hold anything. They're just labels. It's a good way of thinking about it. Instead of writing this, which is also very possible, if we just printed it out directly, as you can see, it printed it twice because it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and also they're kind of like labels as a label. So it's kind of repetitive, but as you can see, the message is clear. So as you can see, they are exactly like labels. They're just a more convenient way of holding data through your program, because in the end, if you have a bunch of these, it gets very confusing, and if you have to use the same thing over and over again, you don't want to copy and paste it. And this will be an example of when it gets very useful to use variables. So let's try this. So let's say you are holding employee numbers. So you want to hold it in two lists. So let's say there's employee list 1 and employee list 2. So employee 1 is 1, employee 2 is 2, employee 3 is 3. And I'm not going to write out everything because that would take too long. But if we go ahead here, you can see how variables become very useful. So in this case, I'm using the variables here and running it under variables 4. Oops, I forgot to change this. You can see how precise programming actually is. So you can see here it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But now let's say we want to use names like Bob Smith and Lindsay Jane and Amanda Corin. So in this example, this is a very good thing. Imagine having an employee list and then wanting to change the identification to names, and then instead of having to go through every place that an employee list is used and changing that manually, you could just change a couple variables and it changes it for all your lists, as you can see here. On the flip side, if you did this by hand, you can already tell you would have to gone through every one and copy and pasted it and changed it. So variables are a way of speeding up your development and just working smart, not hard. So I'm going to show you another thing variables can be used for, and this is going to lead us to our next section. And here I have a list of example sales data from about 40 sales. So in this case, we are going to be passing this to a function and printing it out. This is another representation of data, similar to an Excel spreadsheet. If this was labeled as 1, and then the email, and then the first name, etc., this is another way of representing this data. So let's run variables 4, and I'm running it through the pretty printer. which is what I told about with the import. And you can see here these is example sales data held in an array, which is a sequence of variables, and inside of that is a dictionary, which is basically a lookup table. What a dictionary is, which we'll cover in a later section, is another way and an easy way to represent unique data, such as everybody has a first name, everybody has a last name, almost everybody has a phone number, and everybody has a date of birth. If you wanted to identify all of that, having a dictionary where every type of data has a direct mapping is very nice. It's very similar to a real dictionary where every word has a definition. That's where the name came from, and a lot of things can be modeled as dictionaries. But we'll be covering that a little bit more in depth in a later section. In this section, we covered variables, why they're good to use, and a couple basic examples and tips and tricks of using variables, and how important they are to your development and your automation tasks. So this concludes the section variables, and we're going to be moving on to the next section, which is going to be covering loops.